everyone, and welcome back to our podcast. And today we're continuing the mini series on DAOs. And of course, when we talk about DAOs, there's one crucial component, which is governance. And the moment you talk about DAO governance, the first entity or project you think of is Snapshots. So today we're so happy to welcome Nathan from Snapshot. Hi, Nathan.
Hey there, it's so nice to be here, so nice to chat with you. I'm really excited for this conversation.
All right. Yes, indeed, we have a lot to get to. So previously, we actually invited Stefan from Gnosis, and we talked about the Gnosis Safe, as well as many of the concepts regarding DAO management. And today, I think we want to focus on governance. But before that, I always like to start with some general DAO discussion, right? So just as a warm-up, Nathan, I know you're really into democracy and DAOs, right? So I just want to get your personal answer as to why are DAOs important to you?
It's definitely like this is one of the most interesting questions around DAOs at the moment, because it's such a fluid concept in many ways that why DAOs are important to me can be very different as to why DAOs are very important for Gnosis, and everyone is kind of building on this idea, but this idea is itself moving, and you really realize how global the idea can become, I think, and the potential of DAOs comes from this fluidity. So for me, it's about two things. I think the way I would describe DAOs are first, a coordination structure. It's a new type of coordination mechanism. And many people think that the first DAOs, the very first DAO is Bitcoin. In a way, it's a community governed by rule in code. And this community has several stakeholders. They have different roles between, people who make transactions, people who mine Bitcoin, the people maintaining the code base. All of these people have different incentives that are very clearly ascribed in code, and they cooperate together towards a large goal. We, in general, though, we mostly think of DAOs as things that are powered up by Ethereum and by smart contracts in general. And these kind of modern DAOs is more what I'll be explaining, and what I'll spend a little bit more time on. And I think there's kind of three key concepts that show that DAOs are the structural advantages that DAOs have over traditional organizations. So the first is quite logical, is really this kind of horizontality. The fact that DAOs are networks of individuals rather than, hierarchical structures, kind of pyramids that can kind of stifle innovation and make it so that the people at the bottom of the ladder don't have the opportunity to have great ideas that change their organizations. So in a DAO, the decision-making power, it belongs to the group. It doesn't have to be entirely democratic. It doesn't have to be one person, one vote. But we make sure that in DAOs, all decisions can be challenged, explained, and voted on by every member that desires to participate. Not every member in every case, but every member who wants to participate. The second advantage, and one I think is like really, I don't want to exaggerate, but I would even say historical, is this idea that DAOs, because they're very often remote work only, kind of destroy geographical barriers. You can be in Africa and learn everything you need to know about DAOs online, work in a DAO, join it, and the only thing that's going to matter is the quality of your work and how much you're contributing to the DAO, and you will be financially compensated based on this rather than the place in the world you live in, because at the moment this is the greatest determinant to your personal wealth on a global basis. It's where you live, and I think DAOs have a unique power to destroy this and to make sure it is an instrument of financial equality, and that I'm very concerned about. And finally, those more democratic structures also bring a sort of direct democracy compared to the representative democracy that we see in society today. When you think about your company, when you think about your country, even your community, you're always in a way represented by someone, just because it makes it way easier to, make decisions. If you've got to bring every stakeholder of your country together to vote on every decision, it can be very hard to organize, even though some countries manage, countries like Switzerland show that it is possible, but many countries decide to add a person between yourself and power. And I think DAOs, just technologically, can remove the need for that person. And that kind of brings me to my second point, which is I think DAOs are a toolbox. And by that I mean there's many different things you can do with your organization on the road to DAOification, that help have this more horizontal, fluid structure without actually having to commit fully to being a DAO. By that I mean you could, as your community, have a Gnosis safe. Since this is the last interview you had, imagine your company has a Gnosis safe, or maybe it's your church group that has a Gnosis safe, or your book club that has a Gnosis safe, and together you decide which books you'd like to buy together. Maybe you're voting on Snapshot about this, and then the Gnosis safe will make the transaction to buy all these books and redistribute them. And your book club isn't a DAO, but your book club is using DAO tools to be more transparent, and all of these things that I think are quite positive for any kind of human organization.
Right. There's already so much to cover and unpack there, right? We went from like the open source nature and collaborative nature of even Bitcoin as an OG DAO to the inclusive potential, and finally to like a more horizontal, flatter structure. Should there be the representatives, or should you be more directly involved? There's so much we want to talk about in this episode. But of course, I'd like to just pull this back as well, right? And then for the viewers who are new to Snapshots, I think for people who are involved in DAOs, it's very obvious that Snapshot is the most popular tool for people to vote in DAOs, right? That uses various assets as like your vote and uses various voting mechanisms. But actually, I want to also go back to the origins of Snapshot itself, right? From like idea to like now one of the most popular DAO tools, right? Let's talk about the origin, right? How did it start, and then I understand there's a pseudonymous founder, Fabian, as well. How did he get to create Snapshot? How did you come into the picture? And where's Snapshot today with like how many thousands of spaces and incredible progress since then, along with the entire DAO space?
Yeah, indeed, that was a lot for an introduction. I agree. So let's get back a little bit. So Snapshot, it's a voting framework. It's a platform that allows you to grab your whole community. You go together on Snapshot, you vote on something. And we'll go in a little bit more in detail later as to how we calculate voting power, how we make sure that every decision is transparent. But that's the basic idea of Snapshot. It's an infrastructure tool for DAOs. And the idea for Snapshot, it actually originated from Balancer, the AMM. Around summer 2020, Balancer was looking for a way to vote with tokens in liquidity pools, because this is the base model of the AMM, and they didn't want token holders in liquidity pool to lose their governance rights in other projects, because at the time the only way to vote was to signal a vote with tokens in your wallet through the compound governance framework. So that was the main idea at the beginning. It was really about flexibility, making sure that you could both use your tokens in DeFi and use them to vote and retain voting power. And so this idea was kind of in the air. At Balancer, they were thinking about off-chain governance, because this seemed to be one of the solutions for it. And Fabien was the lead in that project. And Fabien was working on this idea for an off-chain voting system. And when the first product came out, actually quite quickly, it only took really 2 weeks to get the first instance, the very early instance you can imagine of Snapshot out. Fabien really thought, this is a killer product. This is not just for Balancer, this is for anyone. And in a way, at the time, we already thought that gas fees were very high during the summer of 2020. This has not gone better. So it had both this advantage of being free, because you didn't have to process anything on-chain, but at the same time, it was very flexible and allowed for these stake tokens or tokens in liquidity pools to be used. So Fabien went to the team at Balancer and asked, can we develop this further? Can we work on this? And the Balancer team, in really a beautiful showing, I have to say, of the DeFi ethos, really supported him and told him, do your thing. We'll help you, we'll support you, but go ahead and go develop this product that truly is going to, we think, help a lot of people. And it was an interesting start. It was Snapshot has always been free. Snapshot plans on being free forever, and so at the time he had to really work with Gitcoin grants. And I think without this kind of love that we see in Web3 for public good funding and the beautiful work done at Gitcoin, we wouldn't have a Snapshot today, because he needed to put food on the table at some point or another. And so for a long time, Gitcoin grants supported Snapshot, and finally we raised money, last summer, and now we have a larger team working with it. So for a long time, Snapshot was really Fabien's work, and now we're a much bigger team, about 10 people. Himself, he started developing really in the crypto ecosystem in 2015, 2016. And I came way later to Snapshot because my background is actually political philosophy. So I studied political philosophy and really focused on how do we take back the internet for ourselves? How do we make sure that facing the Googles and Facebooks of the world, we retain some kind of human agency, and we continue to be masters of our own destiny on a playground, a digital playground that's becoming more and more ubiquitous to our lives. And this led me really to crypto. I saw DeFi and I was mind blown by this idea that, okay, we're taking back control. We're inventing censorship resistant, immutable tools that allow us to take back our financial freedom. And I think DAOs will be a big tool to take back our, freedom of mind as well. And so I started off doing journalism in crypto because, I was coming out of political philosophy. I thought, I can probably write interesting things about this. And I got into journalism at Crypto Briefing. It was an incredibly rewarding experience. I really loved it. I wrote a lot about, founders, deep dives in DeFi projects, and any kind of new project that was creating something super interesting. I'd asked to meet the founder, talk to him, have an interview, explain everything. And, through all of this, I discovered Snapshot, and it hit me that Snapshot has this, who knows what Snapshot is going to become, but I think it has an incredible potential to change how many organizations, whether crypto native or not, make decisions. So I jumped into Snapshot as soon as I could, and I've been here ever since.
All right. Never look back, and I must say, your background and interests seem to align perfectly with the idea of DAOs, and I can see why you feel so at home at Snapshot, right? I want to pick on the detail for the product itself. Like you said, DAOs can be many things to many different people, and how you use it can be very flexible. So the idea for Snapshots being super flexible, and also to make it really easy, right? Because you mentioned that the only way before to vote was to actually use your token in your wallet. You have to pay gas to signal that on-chain. Snapshot can do it off-chain. So now let's go into the product itself, so that once people know what it is, then they can interpret and use it as they like, right? So let's go to the basics first, right? So you mentioned it's the off-chain signing. So basically, I don't need to sign a transaction on-chain, but off-chain. So for the basics, how does that work? And does that somehow compromise certain trade-offs, right? We'd love to understand which parts are on-chain, which parts are off-chain. If it's off-chain, how do we know that it's verified, secure? And which parts of the stack as well are actually centralized versus decentralized, right? Because while the whole governance structure is decentralized, some of the infrastructure, even parts of Snapshot, there's the feed, the verification system, the domain, notifications, all this may be centralized, right? So just want to get the sense of the approach, the stack, right? And to me, it feels like a really practical kind of way to make DAOs work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to understand Snapshot, you have to understand that how normal voting works on a blockchain. So normally, to vote on a blockchain, and this is something that was developed by the Compound team, still called the Compound Governance. To vote on chain, you've got to make a transaction. There's something that happens on chain, and you pay money to do it. And so with gas fees, this is slightly problematic, but it is incredibly secure, because to tamper with the vote, you'd have to tamper with the Ethereum blockchain itself. So this is an incredible advantage of voting on chain, really. On Snapshot, what you're going to do is you're still going to do an action on chain, but it's not something of the same sort. Rather, you're going to sign a message. Instead of paying for gas fees for something to happen directly, you're going to sign a message assuring it's me who's voting, and I can prove it. So what happens then is we store that, whether it's a proposal or a vote, we store it on IPFS, which is a decentralized storage system. So that means that it's much cheaper to store things on IPFS, but at the same time, you lose this immutability as on a blockchain. This information would be directly verified on chain. So we still have very solid security mechanics. Basically, what we do is when you vote, we give you a receipt. Snapshot gives you a receipt. And if this receipt isn't translated into the results of the vote, because everything about Snapshot is open source, you can check anything that happened, follow every vote. It's all accessible to anyone that wants to see it. So if you received a receipt from Snapshot that says, I voted on this, and you don't see your vote, then you can come to Snapshot and say, what happened here? Obviously, like this hasn't happened, we're lucky enough, but it's more of, right now we're talking a lot about optimistic rollups. This is kind of this source of optimistic censorship resistance. So it's not the same level of security, but at the same time, it allows us to give it for free and have this kind of flexibility that you wouldn't have otherwise. So in general, I think this is kind of the how Snapshot works. The calculation based on all, we're gonna pin all this content on IPFS using Pinata, Arweave, Fleek, and we're gonna use our database to index all those votes and proposal data and calculate the results that you're gonna see in the Snapshot UI. So the Snapshot security in a way works similarly to what you can expect from something that will not put any information on chain, but will still decentralize all the components and all the key parts that are so important to keeping the censorship resistance that you can expect from something like Snapshot. This obviously is how it's working now. I think maybe later we're going to talk about SnapshotX, and there's going to be a big change in SnapshotX, but I don't want to jump the gun too early.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect. I think you covered exactly what I wanted to go into there. And so it's very interesting that you actually use the decentralized storage part, right? So if I may just draw analogies as if that, like, before this, every vote was every transaction. So it's really expensive, but now it's kind of like you batch together all of those, all that data, all those signatures, and you just like start one shot on, say, Arweave or on Pinata or like the to Filecoin on Fleek, right? So you kind of like aggregating the costs. And in fact, I would say Snapshot is probably bearing that cost of the storage on behalf of the projects currently, right?
Yeah. But it's much cheaper than what you could expect on chain. But yeah, Snapshot is still footing the bill for this at the moment.
Right.
But it's not a cost that will put us under the. It's not the kind of cost that is too significant for Snapshot to bear on its own at the moment.
Right.
But yeah, who knows? When you get to like a country, imagine for, it was funny because I don't know if you remember the Elon Musk vote on Twitter, where he asked like, do you want to vote on me selling my Tesla shares or not? So we were just kind of laughing with the team because we were thinking, imagine this vote has happened on Snapshot. I think everything would be broken by now. Would all be broke. It would be absolutely terrible. So, yeah.
Right. So
we're not ready for that type of scaling yet.
Yeah. So to a certain extent, because infrastructures run on some centralized parts, so we're still dependent on Snapshot, right, to pay for the storage and so on. But it works enough, like well enough to store it securely, and then you have the receipt to verify in case anything goes wrong, right? And of course, you don't go about it alone. Like you mentioned just now, we use decentralized storage, right, with IPFS as a file format. So similarly, Snapshot doesn't work in isolation, right? It works because it's in integration with so many different parts of the Web3 stack and Web3 ecosystem. So why don't we go there and talk about like the other partners and other parts of Snapshot that are has its tendrils there, right? So I understand ENS is an incredible one, and naturally with like Gnosis Safe that has that safe snap function, and now you're going to different chains, right? Multi-chains, and I understand recently there's a partnership, for example, with HAL for notifications. So let's talk about that, right? Like the wider ecosystem for snapshots.
Yeah, I think this is my favorite part about kind of the DAO tooling industry, if you can even call it that, because it's an incredible group of people who are each making their own, specialized part of the stack, and then we're kind of all sharing it together because it makes a lot more sense. And you've kind of got this mentality that, we're so early in the lives of DAOs that it's very easy actually to just work together, grow the pie for all of us. And there's not really a competition that will make it so that, I don't know, ENS would think, oh, but Snapshot, maybe they're my competitor. Maybe I should develop a voting system. Or, we're not thinking we need a naming system. And it's really that kind of makes a lot of sense. If I'm taking them like in order, like ENS is a very interesting one because quickly Snapshot ran into problems of name squatting or verifying if people were who they said they were. For example, who's telling me you can go on Snapshot and create a space for Uniswap? And so now we can have member count and everything, but before you can make a Snapshot Uniswap page and we couldn't tell you can't name it Uniswap, So we just kind of relied on ENS to have this kind of register full of names, make sure that, spaces were who they said they were, because that's the specialty of ENS, verifying identity, on the blockchain. And so it made a lot of sense to use ENS to make sure that all of our spaces were exactly who they said they were. And if you think about Gnosis Safe, like Gnosis Safe is really probably one of the most significant partnerships with Snapshot because it kind of works both ways. You can use your Gnosis Safe to vote on Snapshot. And so you can be a fund or you can be a big project that wants to use a multi-sig. All of these things, you can still vote on Snapshot, but at the same time, you can use Snapshot to direct your Gnosis Safe. So the way this works, it's called SafeSnap. The idea is you'll decide on a proposal, and there will be two options. For example, let's vote on who we're sending 100 USDC to, you or me. People will vote, and then through the reality.eth oracle, your Gnosis Safe will know which address to send the funds to. And there's no human interaction there. There's no trust assumption. There's very little trust assumption. There's really this idea that we're kind of building something that's going to make running a decentralized organization super smooth. And that's a big part of our partnership with Gnosis Safe. And in terms of multi-chain voting, well, there's kind of two parts about this. There's just the way that we support many different chains, almost all EVM compatible chains. Kind of the idea there is simply, it's not that complicated as long as we have access to an archive node. As long as we're using off-chain voting, it's really not that complicated to add support for Polygon or AVAX or Arbitrum. All of these are actually quite easy to add as partners, and we want to make sure that their communities are able to use Snapshot and benefit from it. But the other part of like the multi-chain strategy of Snapshot is also because we realized that people had Aave tokens on Ethereum, Polygon, maybe BSC. I don't know. People had the same tokens on many different chains, and we wanted to make sure that they could vote with each of these tokens on their chain of preference and still be counted in the same, in the same vote, and that they're, for Aave, the Aave token, I don't think Aave is on BSC actually, but basically that the Aave token would be worth the same thing no matter the chain it's on. So that was a very big part of the logic there. And finally, I think you mentioned HAL. It's a very cool thing actually. I like HAL a lot. It's basically notifications for blockchain things. So you can get notifications that you're about to get liquidated, but at the same time you can get a notification that a proposal has started on Snapshot. And this is also super important. We could have tried to build our own notification system for Snapshot, and every single project could try to build their own notification system. But why not embrace the Web3 ethos and all work with HAL and make sure that HAL is the notification, and they can perfect this segment of what they do. Just like Snapshot is very focused on perfecting the segment, the vertical of voting. We have to recognize that if we want to make this right, we have to rely on the help of different partners that are building the different part of the technological stack.
I love that, right? So now we start to see like the big picture, right? So from the identity of the project itself, how it relates to certain assets that can sign with multi-sig, or it can be used to govern certain assets already, like immediately implemented. It's across different chains, and it's even to off-chain in terms of like centralized or Web2 services where I can push notifications, right? So everything we build in Web3 is by nature this kind of like open source or collaborative, inclusive, right? So I can really see it really inculcates the culture and the values that we want to push forward. And of course, now coming back to Snapshot, right? So we looked at the big vision. Let's zoom in again. We saw about the off-chain signing, but I think what a lot of people also don't realize now is then how truly flexible Snapshot is. You talked about the LP token voting strategies, but actually I think a lot of people may not have even experienced or tried out, like there are actually hundreds of strategies, even I'm not sure whether I'm overblowing here, but at least tens of viable strategies and at least quite a few popular strategies, right? Like approval, quadratic, rank choice, involving NFTs and so on. So we'd love to also understand that, like, what kind of assets and what kind of voting mechanisms are available in Snapshot, and if you could just highlight some examples here so that we can see, like, come to life.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, I think, as you're saying, it's something that many of people don't know, and that's very, very useful way of using Snapshots. So I think really flexibility is the key of Snapshot's past success, and it is going to continue to matter immensely in making sure that everyone can tailor the Snapshot experience to exactly his or her own needs. So there's kind of two things. There's voting strategies and there's voting systems. So basically voting strategies are ways to calculate voting power. So a very easy way to calculate voting power would be one token, one vote. But you can also say 10 tokens, one vote, and one NFT, one vote, and add both together, because maybe your project both has an NFT and a token. And you could also say, one token on Ethereum, one vote, 10 token on Polygon of a different token is also equal to one vote. Basically, the idea is you can make any kind of strategy you want that gives any kind of voting power to whatever you want. And something that's even, further down the line, but we're not using that yet, but this is something that could be used in the future. Could even bring your own database. You can be a company and have shares and say, all right, I would like anyone in that database who has 15 shares to get 15 voting power. And, Snapshot can accommodate that. It's actually not that hard to program. You do need a little bit of JavaScript experience to code the basics of your strategy. But really, if you know the basics, it should be enough to really tailor it to your own needs. And the reason why there's 200 strategies isn't really that there's 200 different people, different basic strategies. It's rather simply, your Paris swap, and you want something exactly right for your staked system, well, you're going to take one of the existing strategies that maybe has stake tokens and just adapt it a little bit, change the contract ID of the token, make sure that it's exactly just right for you. And the best part is you can really add many different strategies together. So yeah, sky's the limit on this kind of stuff. And then you've got the voting system. And the voting system is how then Snapshot calculates your voting power. So for example, you could say, you've got 10 tokens and one NFT, that's 2 votes. I've got 10 NFTs, that's 10 votes. But we're going to use quadratic voting. So that means that your voting power is going to be the root square of 2, and my voting power is going to be the root square of 10. I'm not going to do math on a podcast. That sounds like a terrible idea. But basically, it would allow you to limit my influence compared to yours because I'm a bigger player than you are. That's maybe we can come back on quadratic voting later because I think that's really interesting. But yeah, an example that comes to mind, one that I find really incredible is Decentraland. So Decentraland, they vote using their mana token. They vote using NFTs you can find in the Decentraland metaverse. They vote using land in Decentraland. I think there's different NFTs and each have multipliers. Some of the NFTs are worth more voting power than others. It's just incredible, you know, and it makes sense. You know, they're part of a metaverse. They're part of a digital community, and not only the token should have voting power. The size of their land, you know, all of this should represent their involvement in the game and should be translated accurately into voting power. So that's kind of what we try to accomplish at Snapshot.
How far can we go with this, right? Can we do like then kind of like how long have I held this token, or what kind of a behavior have I done? How many times has it been transferred or held in the same wallet, right? Never traded. You know, how do we push it to its limits?
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a cool question. I don't know actually. I think there's literal. If you're ready to code it, it can probably be done. I don't know. It's interesting because it really relies on the way that Snapshot goes and checks your voting power, how Snapshot goes and checks your on-chain balances, whether it's possible to do all of these sort of, you know, seeing if the token has been transferred in the past and everything. I think this might be something that SnapshotX is better at doing than Snapshot in the long run, actually. But yeah, you can go quite far. Yeah, for sure. I wanted to say just before something about this because I really like this idea that, you know, you'd be rewarded for how long you spent in, you know, in a space, how many times you've voted in the past, you know, how loyal you've been to your community or something. And I realized that recently I kind of realized that there's a really cool tool on Snapshot, which is a POAP plugin. So basically you will receive a POAP if you vote. What you can do then is assign voting power to these POAPs and say, all right, you've got 10 sushi token. Well, now you've got also a POAP that shows you voted in the past, so you've got 11 voting power. Maybe the POAP is going to be worth 1 sushi worth of voting power. And yeah, I think that's a cool idea. I'd love to see that implemented in some communities because that's a great way of rewarding the loyalty of people who've been kind of following you for long. And also POAPs are awesome. So
could I just also just throw in some ideas, like what if could I also recognize other projects tokens and what have they done with other projects in like the voting power of like my project as well, right? I want to know like, okay, maybe this guy's credible or this person owns like, you know, significant skin in game in some other asset, or I want to exclude like, hey, they own this competitor asset, I want to give them less say, right? And maybe they have negative adverse interest. I don't know if it can somehow
it's interesting, I mean, I think it's going to happen more and more. You're absolutely right. This is something that's going to happen more and more because what do you do if you're a new protocol and you're, let's say, a new AMM and you want to get people to join your AMM and trade on your AMM instead? You can do some kind of vampire attack using token or whatever. But in terms of governance, if you want to take the most, you know, the most active members of governance that are the most prized member of your community, I think if they're very active, if they participate a lot in the life of your community, and you kind of want to vampire attack them from that governance to yours, well, a good way could be to give them voting power based on past votes in something else. It kind of makes me think of Gearbox Protocol, which launched very recently and said, well, basically we're going to look at whoever voted in these particular spaces that are very active DeFi protocols or communities of people who are kind of well known for being very active in the space. And these people, we're going to give them special voting power in Gearbox's live, because we kind of want to get all these people interested and have skin in the game very easily in a way that doesn't cost the Gearbox team any money. It's not like they have to give them token or dilute their token to get them to join. They can simply say, if you want, we recognize your good actions in other governance, and we'd love you to join us. So yeah, I think there's a lot to do there, as you're saying.
Yeah, there's this cross-pollination that goes on. And you kind of like mentioned SnapshotX as well, that actually brings in even more flexibility, or bringing in some sort of like real-world applications with like the databases, right? Shall we now elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, SnapshotX is a product that will happen concurrently with Snapshot. It will not be for everyone in a way. Like SnapshotX is going to be very useful for some protocols, less useful for others. And the idea is, what we're going to do is, as I was explaining in the beginning, Snapshot works off chain, while SnapshotX is going to work on chain. But we're going to go on chain, not on layer 1, which would still cost way too much money. We're going to go on chain on layer 2. So basically, SnapshotX is going to be powered by StarkNet, the layer 2 ZK rollup developed by the Starkware team. And we're working very close with them at the same time, developing SnapshotX. It's quite incredible. It's really incredible work they're doing in terms of scaling Ethereum. And the way it's going to work is, you'll still use the Snapshot UI. You'll still be signing messages. It will still be free for you as an individual. Your DAO will have to foot the bill of there will be some gas costs on StarkNet, and your DAO will have to basically fund an account that funds individual voters. Because for us, it's very important that vote stay free for everyone. We don't want to. I think it's a key reason why we've seen an uptick in governance participation, and we want to keep it this way. So basically, what's going to happen is SnapshotX will use StarkNet to do all the computation and all the indexing that I was telling you happens either in the database or on IPFS. All of this will be on StarkNet, and then StarkNet is going to relay every, maybe at the beginning it's every hour, in a few months or year, it's every block, that will relay information on layer 1 and allow for trustless execution on layer 1. So it's a different architecture that allows SnapshotX to do stuff that simply wasn't possible using Snapshot at the moment.
So it actually has a better security guarantees because of the ZK proofs, and also publishing it on chain from there. And like you mentioned, actually does it also introduce kind of more flexibility? Then could you use more computations because it's trusted, rather than relying on Snapshot itself?
So that's an interesting question. At the beginning, we'll only support ERC20, and soon after, SnapshotX will be able to look at NFTs, eventually multi-chain, everything that Snapshot does. Well, maybe not everything, but a good part of what Snapshot does and the current use cases will still be replicable on SnapshotX. But there's some, use cases that are only possible on Snapshot because Snapshot is off-chain in the first place.
Right.
Because SnapshotX will be on-chain, it will only be able to look at things in a blockchain. So if there's no on-chain proof that you own something, but you do own it, you won't be able to derive voting power from it on SnapshotX, because there will be no place for human input, really. SnapshotX will be entirely censorship resistant and have no trust assumptions, really, whatsoever. So there won't really be a way to add something manually, if you see what I mean. So in terms of flexibility, I think you lose a little bit in SnapshotX, but in exchange you get this better security and at the same time trustless execution. That we were talking about trustless execution in the context of SafeSnap, but SafeSnap still uses an oracle to relay. If you're going from off-chain to on-chain, there's no choice. You'll always have to use an oracle that translates off-chain realities to on-chain realities. Here, everything will be on-chain, so there will not be any need for that type of oracle, and we can really, and this oracle is obviously secure, but at the same time, if you want something that's entirely censorship resistant, then you have to go in this direction.
Right. Okay. So on the spectrum where like purely on-chain voting, like a compound governance module would be like the most trusted, but also very expensive and not very flexible. And then Snapshot was all the way on the other side, where because off-chain you can do anything you like, right? And this kind of like brings it slightly in the middle, and perhaps that is allows you to create that sweet spot where you will be comfortable with it, having like tangible outputs and executing like certain asset transfers, important decisions, but still have enough flexibility and enough kind of like security guarantees to then.
To be honest, this is definitely a question for someone who's more well versed in ZK rollups than I am. But I think there's no trust compromise. There's no security compromise between Compound Governor and the future SnapshotX. It will be the same standard of security. As ZK proofs rely on the security of Ethereum and provide 100% of. I think actually I've heard the founder of Starkware say that 100% is a bad number to give, but allows almost 100% of the security guarantees of Ethereum. For Snap, so SnapshotX will benefit from really the same security as something like Compound Governor.
Right. Well, we need to have another full episode to go into the ZK things. we'll do another time, or perhaps with another person. Now, okay, we've talked a lot about Snapshot, right? All the way from like the whole ecosystem to all the features and all the advanced stuff that you can do as well. I love to now, close the academic book and I'll just talk about DAOs as a whole, right? I think that's what you're really interested in as well. And I think, also tying it to the value or impact of Snapshot, right? Which is like, we talked a lot about flexibility and having all these different strategies, recognizing these different assets. Why is that important? Like, why is having all these like diversity in recognizing types of votes important, right? And part of the answer could be that DAOs are, in general, an experimentation on governance, an experimentation on human coordination, right? Around like who should vote, how to vote, and then like who matters more, or what kind of actions matter more, like what kind of history or what kind of people matter more in certain governance mechanisms, and how does it relate to human coordination? So I'd love to again then pick your brain, right? Then what do you think about some of these mechanisms, right? Which experiments stood out to you, right? Or which direction do you think it should go, like in your mind? I know you were not able to take a stance as Snapshot, right? Because you have to be very neutral as a infrastructure provider. But now that we're just talking about DAOs in general, I'd love to hear your personal thoughts here.
It's an interesting question. I think there's many questions in that question. So but it's very interesting. I think. So first about decentralized governance. So what's the point? What are we really trying to achieve? In decentralized governance, we want both the efficiency of centralized governance, because there's still this idea going around that, and I'm not going to give you a definitive, this is wrong or this is right, but there's this idea that if you have a boss or if you have a leader, it's going to be more efficient than if there's none. And I think that's true as long as the community doesn't have the right tooling. If the community has the right tooling to take the right decisions, then they'll go actually much further together than they would go, by themselves or with a direct leader. So what does that mean? That means that there's a fundamental difference between the assumption that everyone should vote and the assumption that everyone should be able to vote. And the difference is we actually don't need everyone to vote on everything. We need everyone to be able to manifest their opinion on everything, but they don't need to vote on everything. So sacrificing efficiency for decentralization only works if it makes sense to the people who are building this organization that has to be both efficient and decentralized. So I'm going to give an example because this was quite theoretical. When ENS launched, everyone who claimed the ENS airdrop had to ratify a constitution that limits what the ENS community as a whole can do. And when you make a constitution, and that's why many countries have constitution, the executive branch of the country can make certain decisions without consulting with the people as a whole and still have democratic legitimacy behind their actions. Because people agreed with the constitution, a constitution should be many, small items and what the government is allowed to and not to do when these situations happened. So basically what ENS did is, we're going to have a constitution and then we're going to have delegates. And you had to choose a delegate as well. And your delegate, you could choose him or her on the basis of, I know him, I know her, I respect her work, I think he's funny on Twitter. That doesn't matter. You're able to choose whatever delegate you want to represent you to kind of speed up the process of governance and make sure that you have the right type of democratic legitimacy in your decision and people that are actively interested in pushing the protocol forward while still representing token holders. And that's basically the advantage of of representative democracies on direct democracies. It's a bit faster. There's less people to keep in the loop. And if as a voter you disagree, well, the cool part about the ENS, delegation mechanism is you can simply say, well, I'm not delegating my tokens to this or that person anymore. I'm going to delegate to someone else. And it's based on your own, appraisal of what's going well, what's not going so well. So all of these experiments, I think the key thing in decentralized governance is we're still super early. And it's hard to say what's going to work, what's not going to work. But the cool thing is through the cryptographic tools like tokens or like NFTs or many of these other things, we can try out really cool stuff. And this is the most important part. It's really just trying out different modes of decentralized governance and seeing what sticks. So, okay, this was the first part of your question. And then you maybe had a second part, which was another, more tangible example of a cool new voting mechanism. And I think I'd like to come back on quadratic voting that I kind of touched on earlier. And this idea that, so if you've got 10 tokens, if you've got 100 tokens, your voting power will be 10 because root square of 100. And if you've got 10,000 tokens, well, your voting power will be 100, root square of 10,000. So kind of reducing the impact of whales on, the democratic process and making sure that even smaller token holders still have a voice. Well, this is a very interesting experiment because in blockchain, we have an issue called Sybil resistance. And it's this idea that, well, but what keeps you from making 10 wallets with 1,000 token rather than one with 10,000? Because you'll have way more voting power if you use 10 wallets of 1,000 token versus one of 10,000. And this is an issue that's been going on for a while. We keep thinking, well, how are we going to solve this? How are we going to make sure that individuals are individuals on the blockchain? And this is a field I'm super excited about because many different projects are working on it. I'm thinking of Orange Protocol, Zoro, Sismo, Bright Idea, Proof of Humanity. These are all projects that are working on making sure not of who you are on a blockchain, but rather making sure you are a single person, making sure there is one individual behind that account that's verifiable. And then we don't have to know his or her name, but we simply can know that he or her is, he or she is unique. And when I see kind of the state of all of these governance experiments, I think it's amazing. I think we're really right in the middle of figuring out what decentralized governance can look like.
Oh yeah, absolutely, right? I think I love that you brought up the implicit assumption that everybody has that like basically you need to rely on the small group of people to make things happen. But actually, you don't necessarily have to, right? Maybe it's about giving people an option. Or even if you rely on those people, it's important for them to keep that option to replace those people pretty regularly and then remind them to wield that power, right? At the same time, I think a lot of what we're talking about is like the voting mechanisms, right? Like making sure that they're real people, reducing the disproportionate power of the wealthy or those who have been early, maybe, right? And making sure it's more equitable. At the same time, I think on the flip side, there's also the incentive design, right? Like, why do people want to vote? And I think here we have been kind of like operating perhaps on the assumption that people want to express their opinions. And I'm not like I think in the real world, like I'm not too sure whether that's completely true as well. And I don't know which part of it is because of before this we didn't have a chance, right? A lot of us like work in organizations that are highly hierarchical. You have to basically listen, right? Or even societies that are pretty hierarchical, governments that are more hierarchical, or like you use technological platforms that don't give you that power to decide for yourself, right? Often, right? They really dictate for you a lot of the things, right? So it could be a product of being in this environment, but it could also be, right? Could we make that assumption that people don't necessarily want to express their opinions or don't often express their opinions about many things? Either they don't know enough, or they don't care enough, or they just don't want to take that time to do it. And so there some like, do we need other types of incentives? Is it more of a moral, philosophical, cultural problem rather than the voting mechanisms themselves, right? What do you think here?
That's super interesting. That's a super interesting way of thinking about it, because obviously you'll never get 100% participation. That just you'd have to force some people to participate if you wanted 100% participation, because obviously some people do not care enough. So what you can work on as a DAO, as an online community, as any kind of decentralized organization, is there's kind of two levers, let's say. There's the cost lever and then there's the impact lever. And so the cost one is pretty much what Snapshot works on. Snapshot is busy figuring out how to reduce cost as much as possible, making it free, making it flexible. We've added a timeline feature that allows you to kind of see all of the latest proposals, so you can really scan through them and vote as quickly as you'd like, because you have other things in your life than voting in all of the decentralized projects you're interested in. And you can't expect people to show up if it's a lot of work after they have their own personal lives, and I can imagine that they don't have that much time to give to that. So, but we can still do a lot more. There's still a lot more things that we can do to make the voting experience as cheap as possible, I guess is the way you could say it. But cheap in terms of information, that's where HAL comes in. Simply like notifications that tell you, there's a new proposal coming up, that you don't have to check it every day. You can simply see when there's a new one coming up. This is a way we reduce cost of staying informed, but even like kind of the technological costs. And we're actually working. We haven't announced it officially yet, but I guess this is as good a place as any. We're working on a mobile app that should come out around Q2 2022. And the idea is also to really make your access to Snapshot as easy as possible, and your access to decentralized governance in general as easy as possible. So that's the first part, can reduce cost. The other part is you can improve impact. If you let your community vote on decisions that really don't matter that much or are rather boring, you will see less participation than otherwise. And I'm kind of thinking, I always have this thought in mind. I think it was one of the most powerful pictures I've seen in my life. It was a line of, I would say, 2 or 3 entire blocks of Americans going to vote. And it was like middle of November. I think that's when the elections happened. It was middle of November. And I think, if I remember correctly, it was either, it was voters in a red state that had been red for 50 years. And so probably there wouldn't even be, a change. It would still continue to be a Republican state. And they had to queue, I think, if I remember correctly, for like 10 hours to go and cast their votes. And it's incredible because the cost is crazy high. You'd have to take a day off because I think the votes are during the week. And then you'd have to stand around in the freezing November of, I don't know which American city, to go and vote for, in the end, have a large chance that your vote has no impact. But it's simply that the impact of electing the president of your country is so high that you're ready to make this personal sacrifice and you're ready to incur the costs. And when I see that, I think cost is the more important one of the two. Impact is the most important one of the two. It doesn't matter the cost in the end. If your impact is really high, then you'll go and vote and you'll go and participate in your decentralized governance or in any kind of democracy. So obviously some people are not interested in voting, but at the same time, you've got to give them something interesting to vote for them to go and vote. And that's kind of one way you can touch the impact level. And the other way, I think, is also just kind of rewarding people who take part in governance. I've heard tons of ideas around this that go from like diluting the members that don't vote by offering tokens to the members that vote. There was the plugin I was talking about before, which I think is really fun. It's free to set up, it's free to distribute. It's just a really cool way of showing your enthusiasm to your community. And all of these, they can be added to help participation. But in the end, if you want high participation, give your voters vote that matters. That's the key part. And then the last part is also like there's something to keep in mind as well, which is there's kind of like a maybe I don't know the right term, but let's say like original sin of governance tokens. And the original sin of governance token is that they're both voting power and money. And if I give you one uni token, are you going to see it as, I don't know where the market is, but I don't know, $20, or are you going to see it as one vote in the Uniswap DAO? And for a lot of people, you can blame people for seeing it as $20 in certain cases. And that's very understandable, especially when you see how many percent of tokens are held on centralized exchange as well. These are all tokens that will never be able to participate in governance. So in terms of decentralized governance, set your sights to something realistic because you'll never get 100%, and then give your community good reasons to show up. And then I think you'll get good participation.
Yeah, as you mentioned, so it's the cost and the impact. And like you said, you can add some incentives, you can reduce the cost, but really you want people to vote on what matters, right? And in a very practical setting as well, like you mentioned just now, like there are often very many small decisions that need to be made, right? For a project to move forward, for the product to be launched, and like they're just small decisions that need to be executed. And for those, does it make sense then to perhaps delegate to some sort of people? And then we kind of go back to that kind of representative democracy model, right? Or maybe we need some sort of a hybrid. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and how it has worked out for some DAOs that you've seen.
Yeah, it's definitely so delegation is very interesting because it can be at the same time a cheap cop-out. You can say, I'm just going to delegate, not care about governance. It's fine. And I trust that person is going to make the right decisions anyway. And you can be blamed for that. I think it's extremely okay to consider your participation in governance as superfluous to your own time or involvement in the project. And that's fine. I can totally understand that. What needs to be done, though, for delegation to work well is give the right kind of information as a project so that the people that are interested in your governance stay around. You can do delegation because nobody knows what's going on anyway. you can do delegation on a very clear, if you communicate well what the big decisions are going to be about in a way that people will be able to choose a delegate well, that's more than fine. Because then the delegate is going to be able to, you know why you get delegated into that person. You're delegating to someone in the ENS ecosystem because you strongly believe that name squatters should be publicly flayed. And, if that person agrees with your views, then you delegate to that person, and it's clear, it's all above board. I think where delegation kind of hurts is, and sometimes you can see it in our representative democracies, when you've got like layers and layers of bureaucratic administration and party systems and everything, and it gets super hard to see really what am I voting for. I'm voting for, I'm from Belgium. Belgium is probably one of the most complicated, let's say, complicated systems in the world in terms of democracy. We have 12 parties, they make coalitions, and we're a country of 10 million people, and I think we have 7 parliaments. It's something very crazy like this. And underneath all these layers of governance, it's getting harder and harder for me to go to the polls and really, in clear conscience, think, I know what I'm doing here. I'm voting for the right person. And then you end up voting for something that kind of matches your ideals, and then you end up with political apathy and people that just don't want to go to vote anymore because this is way too complex and there's no tangible reason for me to go and vote for this person instead of this person because I genuinely don't know how that would affect my community, in my case, my country. So this is the goal of delegation. Delegation has to be, governance has to be clear for delegation to make sense.
So it's almost like the political people who run for office based on particular missions or platforms or like policies that they want to champion, right? You kind of need to know what they are for, and therefore you can kind of say, okay, identify with this person. I think we are more aligned in our values. They will vote how I would have voted if I were them, and spending that time reading those proposals, or if I had the capacity to even understand those proposals, like my values are aligned, right? In a way. So do you think that kind of works as long as it's communicated well? But should we still have like a referendum system, right, for like some of the most important votes, right, where like maybe the most important ones that affect everyone who vote directly, issue by issue, but then the more kind of like generalized day-to-day stuff, then you might delegate that. But that also means that the delegates become less important, right, because they only manage the small decisions. They don't really have the decision-making power, right? Does that hybrid then make sense, or or what have you seen so far?
Yeah, I think a hybrid model like you're describing is what makes the most sense. It's hard to put in place because it relies on you saying there's going to be important decisions and there are going to be day-to-day mundane decisions. And just this, making sure that we're all agreeing on what is mundane and what is very important is already something that should be, part of a constitution or a referendum or something like this. In general, and I think this kind of comes back to why DAOs, I think, have a very strong chance of disrupting the way organizations all around the world work, is because with DAOs, everything's in the open. It's in the code. The code will decide whether, giving away less than $10,000, you need 2 multi-sig signers. Giving away more than $10,000, you need a third one, and the third one is actually controlled by an oracle linked to a snapshot vote. If you want to cheat, there's no way. There's no gray area with code. And I think that's a very important strength of DAOs. It's you can check the code. You can see exactly what is what's the extent of the executive powers of the delegates you've elected, and what is still to be left to your community. And I think it's an issue that comes up more and more. I hear about it all the time these days with everything going on with the pandemic. You hear so much about all governments overstepping their, what they should be able to do or whatever. But the thing is, we wouldn't have arrived to this situation if everything was very clear on what is the extent of the powers of the executive branch of your government and what is outside of it. A lockdown. Should a government be able to restrict the movement of their citizens? It's unclear in many constitutions or in many states, but it is a right that the government has decided to use. And if this was in a smart contract, it would be very clear what the government can and can't, decide. And so, in the same sense, where we were joking about ENS publicly flaying name squatters, if it is clear in the smart contract that this is something they can do, they can take back certain names based on popular votes. Well, they can, and if they can't, it's impossible to do so.
Yeah, so we shouldn't forget that there is the ultimate kind of like tool, which is just using code or smart contracts to enforce what is even possible. And then around
Exactly.
it, you have humans to define like what are the values that inform that immutable set of interactions, and then like delegate some people to then like fill in the gaps of like what the code does not cover. Yeah, so in a way, yeah, it kind of like feels like the most important part is the constitution should be in smart contract or in code. And then how do you define the constitution? Everybody should be involved because that is the most critical decision. And then to maintain it or to keep it relevant, to add the context, to keep it operating, that's when it might make sense to delegate, right? So that that those people can then keep it going while you make sure the whole thing still aligns with like why the DAO is there in the first place. Wow, I think we're coming to like quite a clear picture of like maybe the ideal DAO, but we don't want to claim that, right?
Yeah, it's crazy because so it depends on what you think the ideal DAO should be. But I think you're absolutely right. Like for example, there's a lot of people. If you do consider Bitcoin as a DAO, there's a lot of people who will say the Bitcoin code should never be touched. Like this is an important part of the value proposition of Bitcoin, that the core code of Bitcoin should never be changed in any way. And there's people who are saying, oh, but actually, if proof of stake makes sense, maybe we should move to proof of stake. Or maybe actually halving emissions doesn't work as well on the long run. So what if we run into a problem? We should maybe change this. And the more time passes and the more these disputes will be important and will have to be resolved in one way or another by the Bitcoin community. And if they decide to go with delegates to represent their voting power, it could be a right way of doing it because the debate is clear. You'd go for a delegate that says, we'll not touch it, and you can go for a delegate that says, we'll change it. As long as it's very clear what the delegate stands for and what his or her opinions are, I think it makes a lot of sense to go for this kind of system with delegation.
Yeah, actually, I love this to come back to like the Bitcoin example, right? Because like that is the prime example of like it's already done, it's immutable, you're never going to change it. So it's as if that like when the Constitution was written, whatever context and decisions they made then was perfect, or you treat it as perfect. Like you follow the letter of the law in a way rather than the spirit of the law or the Constitution, right? Because maybe it was written in that way so that you wouldn't lose power to a certain group, for example, right? Or so that you protect certain rights that should be maintained forever. But there's some things that should still be refreshed, right? And if it's completely immutable, then it's impossible. So I don't know, right? I guess we need to have the experiments to see, right? Things that don't change and things that change all the time, too much, too little. And that's the beauty of the DAO space, right? That all these experiments are possible. I'd like to still, I know we've talked about many examples. Is there one you still like to highlight that has shown some sort of breakthrough that was not possible or not done before in the previous real world, be it in like, corporates or in governments, in like grassroots organizations? Have you seen any form of coordination that's actually disruptive innovation so far?
Well, it's an interesting question because this is really pinpointing one project in particular. So I'd just like to start this answer by stressing out that this is my opinion and this doesn't represent Snapshot as a whole. It's just me. But I think, there's one that springs to mind first. So I guess I'm going to go with this. I don't know if you've heard of Klima DAO on Polygon. So yeah, basically it's using the ohm model to lock up carbon credits. And I'm not part of the project. I'm not involved in the project, but I just think the idea is amazing. The idea of using these kind of tools, because it's really, I think at the very beginning I was kind of saying that for me, DAOs are a toolbox, and tokens are part of the DAO toolbox, and Gnosis Safe is part of the DAO toolbox, and all of these can be used to make your organization more transparent or more decentralized. Well, I think that Klima DAO is an example of, if they weren't using the DAO toolbox, this would be just a carbon offset project like many others. And here they managed to reach incredible, tons and tons. I don't want to say a number because I'm not sure myself, but tons and tons of carbon that they managed to lock in forever, if my understanding of the protocol is correct, just through the mechanisms that many other projects use. And why I love this example is just this idea that carbon offsets programs or organizations, this is nothing new. There's many other organizations that do things like that, and it's incredible that many other organizations do things like that. But using these tools makes the entire operation more transparent, more decentralized, and as we've seen with just the success of this project, extremely efficient. And I think this is something that still a lot of people doubt. Is it going to be efficient? Is it going to be really, exactly what it says it's going to be in a way? Is this going to be fast enough? Is it going to be adaptive enough? Well, yes. The answer was yes. All
right. That is certainly a feature we look forward to. And I think for me as well, Klima DAO was extremely exciting. I was there at the kind of like initial launch, right, contributing to the carbon. And I think it fits very well into one of the ideas I've been thinking for some time, which is around like, to join a DAO, you need some sort of like proof of work, right? And the proof of work is enshrined in the constitution, right? In Bitcoin's case, it's providing computation power or like a calculation power. Like in Klima DAO's case, your initial proof is by contributing to carbon capture, like be it in actually locking it up yourself or contributing to the demand of capturing carbon. And that means that just by you participating in a DAO or having ownership in a DAO, you already have contributed to the cause or the mission or the constitution of why it exists in the first place, right? So
no, absolutely. And then you have this explosion of talent and potential that comes from like-minded people feeling this kind of power of community in a way that just isn't really possible without breaking, the boundaries of the physical world. If you've been in a Discord at the cusp of something incredible happening like this, you see what I mean. It's just this idea of so much potential that could come from anywhere, and everyone bringing 100% of their skills, and they're not I'm going to hire this person to design the UI of my website. No, this person is going to be part of my organization, and I'm going to let this person exert his or her potential in any way that makes sense, and that makes him or her feel part and happy and contributing to the DAO. And I think that's just an incredible and a very understated mechanism that makes me very bullish on DAOs, obviously.
All right. So speaking of bullish, it's time to move on to the future. So any kind of bold predictions you'd like to make for DAOs in 2022? I think we kind of like already made a little prediction, although it means nothing, that 2022 is year of the DAO. But what does that mean to you, right? Do you agree? What do you see happening?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, 2022, year of the DAOs. Well, DAOs are organizations. So it's about each and every one of us to make this the year of DAOs. It's not just going to happen like this. We have to work harder there for, I think if 2020 was the year of DeFi and 21 year of NFTs, these are highly speculative things. While DAOs are they're human. There's no real way to speculate on a DAO. Well, yeah, you can buy the DAO's token and hope that their explosion of talent and potential will happen. But I think I would say 2022 is the year where the world discovers that by doing things decentralized, we actually don't lose anything. Everyone is happier and we work better together. And so in that sense, yeah, year of DAOs, let's go.
Nice, let's go. I'm not sure whether this throws a wrench into it. I think for a long time we were talking about community DAOs, right? People that follow certain personalities or brands. And well, this just recently we've seen the rise of what we call the SIMP NFT DAOs around certain figures. And well, they call themselves DAOs, right? And in fact, it is because it started from grassroots movements, just like fans of a particular brand or person or influencer. We just come together and celebrate that. So, does that feed into the narrative or the predictions, or does it change any of the expectations here? What's your quick take?
Yeah, well, so I'm a big fan of this really famous essay called "The 1,000 True Fans," and it's just kind of this idea that the internet was going to bring a model where if you had 1,000 true fans, you'd be able to live off of what you love. And you're making a weird style of music that only 1,000 people in the world like. Well, they're going to find you. They're all going to be able to give you $2 a month, and you're going to be able to live off of that. And this kind of dream, because this essay is like 2002, 2003, I think. And this kind of dream didn't materialize. They're just, if you're on Spotify, you're being paid 0.3 cents per play. I think it's something like this. So, even my most successful musical-minded friends would not be able to live off of Spotify. So we need to find a way to better manage the creators of humanity, whether they're sculptors, artists, musicians, or simp masters. It's not our place to judge. It's not our place to judge what is creating, what is not creating. It's our place to create a system where people can be, rewarded for doing what they love. And this is a super important concept. And I think it might even be the most important thing that crypto does if we manage to get this right, because the nature of work is changing incredibly fast, and automatization is making many jobs redundant. So how are we going to keep having systems where people feel like they're contributing to the world in meaningful ways, in very often more meaningful ways than they used to? And I think this system will happen when we have some kind of better distribution mechanism and better ways to pay these people to do what they love and to create the music that they love and post pictures on Instagram.
Yeah. Well, okay. A few spicy questions then to close it up. Then, so are you part of IreneDAO?
I am not part of IreneDAO, sadly.
Right. Okay, but you're open.
It's way too expensive for me.
All right. Pricing people out already. That's how popular it is, I guess, right now. Another spicy question then for Snapshot. What are the plans? I think Fabian kind of teased could we tokenize communities? Could we have the true fans of Snapshot stand up and form a DAO, like form a SIMP DAO for a Snapshot for yourself? Who knows? Or will it become a public good? All right. What do we see here in 2022 for Snapshot?
Yeah. Well, so Snapshot is a public good and it wants to stay one. So what that means is the success of DAOs is linked in some small part to the success of Snapshot. If Snapshot does a good job, then it will help DAOs better organize. But in a much more significant way, the success of DAOs is linked to the success of Snapshot. No, the opposite. The success of Snapshot is linked to the success of DAOs, we've seen just an explosion of new spaces and new communities coming on Snapshot. And I'd like to say that this because Snapshot is an incredible product. Maybe it is, but the truth is it's also because there's an incredible movement rallying up behind DAOs at the moment, an incredible force behind it. And in that sense, Snapshot has to kind of be capable of handling all of that traffic and making sure that the product is the best it can be to power that growth and power this kind of potential. So in terms of revenue, that means no revenue. If you start making people pay for Snapshot, then you're not borrowing and you're not letting that explosion of potential happen. You're basically saying, finally, we have loads of users. This is the moment we monetize. And this is how you stop a trend from exploding, So in terms of revenue, the answer is no. We want to stay a public good, and Snapshot wants to stay a public good. In terms of token, that's a whole different story, I think. I think tokens are an incredible, coordination mechanism. And eventually, Snapshot is the community. Snapshot is the Snapshot community. There has to be no difference between those two concepts for Snapshot to really have achieved its potential. And in that sense, well, the best way of kind of governing that community would be a token. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it's in the plans, that it's coming in the next 6 months. I don't know if it's coming this year, but I wouldn't exclude it. I definitely wouldn't exclude it because it's one of the tools that make DAOs very, very powerful. And it's one of the tools that might really align the interest of both the communities on Snapshot, the users that vote in these communities, the Snapshot development team, which is important to keep well incentivized to continue the growth of Snapshot, and all of these things. So I don't think a token is out of the question. Certainly not, actually. I think it's very much when the Snapshot team figures out how a token can really help support and safeguard the integrity of Snapshot in a way that really makes sense, then we'll go for it.
Or NFTs, who knows, right?
Well, NFTs. This is actually stay tuned. We love this idea. So absolutely.
Yeah. And well, in the spirit of DAOs and open collaboration, if you have any ideas, right? I'm sure, Nathan, you're open to hearing thoughts around should Snapshot have a token? When? How? What kind of mechanisms? Right? What should we incentivize? Right?
For sure. We're really open to that discussion. We love to Snapshot itself is kind of doing its best to blur the line between the contributors to Snapshot and the team, and eventually I think, and this I think is a question of months, there will really be nothing hidden. You can already see everything that the team is working on GitHub. You can access everything and participate. There's even bounties for contributors and everything. But eventually, all of these discussions, they will happen in the open because it has to.
Indeed. Well, I think we're certainly looking forward to that. And to really wrap it up now, any final shout-outs you'd like to make, or any tips for new DAOs? Anything you'd like to share? A final word.
Well, I think the shout-out is for anyone who is, considering strongly to move into Web3 and kind of come build with us the cool stuff that's going to revolutionize the world. So do it. Quit your job. Go full Web3.
Go full Web3. Awesome. I love that. And just finally, how do we get in touch with either yourself or with Snapshot?
Or you can look on Twitter for Snapshot. Just type Snapshot, and then if you really want to talk with everyone and have take part in more active discussions that what Twitter can really bring, there's the Discord link right there. The Discord is open to anyone, so come and chat with us. It's going to be fun.
Yes, everyone, let's join the conversations and make the year of the DAO happen. Thank you so much again, Nathan, for coming with us and contributing to this incredible conversation today. It's been so insightful. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Really, thank you so much for animating, and it was really a very, very interesting conversation.
All right, and to everyone tuning in, thank you as well, and I hope you have taken something away. And we'll see you next time.